Imagine yourself drifting, not through space, but through the deep folds of time. There is no need to hurry, no reason to hold on to the present. Let the edges of the now grow soft. Let the distractions dim, and allow your breath to settle into a rhythm as steady as the turning of the seasons. In this quiet space, far removed from buzzing phones and city lights, a door opens, not a door made of wood or stone, but one woven from memory, silence, and the dust of ancient footprints. You step through it gently. No alarms ring. There is no fanfare. Only the soft hush of wind through wild grass, the muted whisper of leaves brushing against one another, and the distant song of a bird you do not recognize. The light is different here, softer, cooler. There is no artificial glow. The sky above is impossibly wide, scattered with stars that shine like tiny stories waiting to be told. You are in a world untouched by modernity. A world that stretches out in quiet, slow unfolding. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and damp earth. Beneath your bare feet, the soil is cool and slightly moist, packed firm by the passage of humans and animals alike. The land is not wild in the way we think of untouched nature. Is shaped subtly by those who live with it, not over it. A trail of flattened grass marks the way from one cluster of trees to another, where the soft curve of a shelter is nearly hidden in the landscape. Not a house, not a hut, but a home nonetheless. You are in the Neolithic world, long before kings sat on thrones, before pyramids reached toward the sky, before even the first written words carved their place into stone. People lived, not as abstract beings or faceless ancestors, but as women and men, children and elders, whose hearts beat with the same persistent rhythm as yours. They lived close to the land not by choice, but by nature. Every moment of their day, from the first light of dawn to the hush of nightfall, was shaped by necessity, by custom, and by the steady dance of survival. This is not the world of legend or myth. It is the world of calloused palms and creaking joints, of footsteps worn into stone paths, of careful hands wrapping plant fibers into baskets, of eyes searching the horizon for signs of weather or prey. Their world was not quiet in the way a museum is quiet. It was alive with motion and sound, but a different kind of motion, a different kind of sound. The rhythmic scraping of stone against grain, the low murmur of conversation by the fire, the crackle of dried leaves underfoot. Let us pause here, in this moment between eras. The people of the Neolithic do not yet know of empires or money. They measure wealth in food stores, in warm furs, in a number of hands able to work the earth or carry a child. They do not write contracts, but they remember faces, promises, transgressions, kindnesses. Their law is custom. Their clock is the sun. In a clearing near a winding stream, a woman kneels beside a flat stone. She grinds grain slowly, steadily, her movements practiced. Her child sleeps nearby, swaddled in a sling made from woven reeds and softened skins. Another woman stokes the fire, coaxing heat from embers that never truly go cold. A man returns from the woods with a bundle of sticks on his back. They speak. Little words are precious and often unnecessary. Their lives are intertwined by action more than conversation. And yet, within this simplicity, there is depth. The rhythm of their days is familiar. They wake not to alarms, but to light, tea. They eat not by schedule, but by hunger. They rest when the work is done, not when the clock permits. Imagine the comfort in that pattern. The predictability of a life dictated not by machines or meetings, but by weather, by harvest, by the needs of the body and the wisdom of the seasons. Let yourself feel the pace of that life. Slower, closer, intentional. A child might spend hours watching the way a beetle moves across the dirt. An elder may sit silently, eyes half closed, listening to the wind as if it speaks. Every object, has a use. Every use has a method. Every method is taught, shared, and passed on not through textbooks, but through demonstration, repetition, and gentle correction. It is easy to romanticize such a life, to imagine it as pure or idyllic, but the Neolithic world is not free from hardship. It is a world of effort, of labor, of uncertainty. Illness comes without warning. Weather changes without mercy. A failed hunt or a spoiled store of grain can mean hunger, not just for one, but for all. There are no guarantees, and yet the people endure. They adapt. They remember which plants to chew when fever strikes. They learn which rivers run dry in summer and which are fed by springs underground. They build not to dominate the landscape, but to nest within it. Picture a village, if you can call it that, not built in straight lines or grids, but scattered gently among trees and hills. Each dwelling follows the contours of the land. No two are identical. They are made of wood, of stone, of clay mixed with straw. Some are partly sunk into the earth, their walls cool in the heat of summer. Others are raised slightly, safe from flooding rains. Roofs are layered with branches and sod, alive with moss and insects. The hearth is always at the center, not just of the structure, but of the life lived within it. Around this hearth, stories are told, not with flair or flourish, but with a steady cadence. A child asks why the moon changes shape. An elder traces a pattern in the ash and tells of a fox that chased the moon across the sky. It is not meant to be factual, it is meant to make sense of mystery. In the absence of science, there is observation. In the absence of certainty, there is myth. And in these stories, truths emerge not about the moon, perhaps, but about the people who tell them. What did they dream about, these people of the Neolithic world? Did they long for more? For safety? For comfort, perhaps? But perhaps they longed for the return of the sun after a long winter, for the sound of frogs in spring, for a child's first step, for a good harvest. Their dreams were likely rooted in the earth's small, tangible, and yet no less meaningful. And so, we begin our journey here, not at the foot of a monument, but in the soft hush of everyday life. We will not rush. We will follow the natural rhythm of their world, one step at a time. In the next chapters, we will walk through their geography, feel the shape of their land. We'll step into their shelters and examine how they carved out private spaces. We'll gather food with them, observe the subtle rituals of mealtimes. We'll explore their beliefs, not through scriptures, but through artifacts and the placement of stones. Through it all, remember, these were real people, not symbols, not shadows. They lived and breathed and felt. Their lives were no more primitive in value than ours, only different in texture, in rhythm, in scope. So now, let your breath settle. Let your thoughts slow. You are held, not by blankets or walls, but by time itself. We are going back, not to escape, but to remember. Feel the steady pulse of a world before noise, before haste, before kings, before cities. Welcome to the Neolithic. The world of the Neolithic was not a single place. It was many places, forests, dense with ancient trees, valleys cradled by slow rivers, wind-swept plains dotted with wild grasses, coastlines that whispered with the rhythm of the sea. Each of these places shaped the people who lived there, and in turn, those people slowly, carefully began to shape the land back. But they did not conquer it. They did not remake it in stone or concrete. They listened to the land first. They studied it, adapted to it, moved with it. Geography in the Neolithic world was not backdrop, was teacher, boundary, and guide. Imagine waking in a small, low shelter tucked beneath the canopy of a broadleaf forest. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of dew and moss. Round you, the trees stand like silent sentinels, their trunks wide and gnarled, their leaves whispering secrets in the morning breeze. The light filters down in narrow beams, catching dust motes and insect wings. Beneath your feet, The ground is a patchwork of roots, damp earth, and fallen leaves. You do not control this place, you live within it, part of a rhythm, older than language, or picture instead, a wide open plain. The sky stretches in every direction, a vast dome above fields of swaying grasses. In the distance, a herd of red deer moves like smoke, graceful and alert. The wind moves freely here, unbroken by trees, and with it comes the scent of dry soil and wildflowers. There are no fences, no roads, no signs, but those who live here know the paths, the migration routes, the places where wild grain grows thickest, where flint can be chipped from the earth with steady hands. To the north, tundra. The ground is harder, colder, the vegetation sparse, but enduring. People here rely on reindeer and seals, on bone and hide. Their shelters are low and insulated, their tools adapted to a life lived in cycles of freeze and thaw. In contrast, near warmer coasts and river deltas, life grows dense and abundant. Here, fish dart through clear water, reeds grow tall and useful, and the soil, rich with silt and ash, welcomes the first careful attempts at cultivation. Geography was not just where people lived, it was how they lived. In river valleys, the Neolithic people found nourishment and movement. Rivers gave water to drink, fish to catch, and fertile soil for planting. They also offered pathways, routes of travel not carved with tools, but worn into being by water and time. Along their banks, villages would emerge, loose gatherings of homes that followed the curves of the current. And as the river shifted, so did the people, moving with the flow, adjusting their boundaries, always watching. Forests, on the other hand, provided shelter and danger in equal measure. Their thick canopy offered protection from sun and storm, but also harbored predators and made visibility limited. Here, Neolithic people learned to be quiet, to listen. They gathered nuts and berries, set snares along known trails, and carved wooden tools from fallen limbs. In this shadowed world, movement was slow and deliberate, and life demanded constant attention. On coasts and islands, the ocean became both provider and mystery. Its tides dictated movement. Its moods could turn kindling boats to driftwood. But it also brought fish in abundance, shells that could be worked into tools or ornaments, and even drifted trees that would have taken hours to fell. Some Neolithic people learned to read the waves, to understand wind patterns, to launch dugout canoes into waters that seemed endless. For them, the sea was not a barrier, was a bridge. Over generations, the relationship between humans and geography deepened. They did not build over the land, they built within it. Homes were placed where the sun would warm the walls in winter. Fields were chosen for their closeness to streams. Caves were selected, not just for shelter, but for acoustics, for dryness, for spiritual meaning. And when a place no longer offered what was needed, the people moved not with regret, but with respect. There was a quiet understanding in these movements, a language of land that did not need words. When a certain flower bloomed, it meant the herd was near. When the frogs fell silent, the rain would come. When the river turned cloudy, fish were spawning. These signs were not magical. They were observations, passed down not in textbooks, but through stories and repeated experience. To live in the Neolithic world was to be a student of nature, not once, but always. And slowly, as people settled longer in certain places, they began to shape the environment back. Not by domination, but by cooperation. The first gardens were not neat rows of tilled soil, but small plots of familiar plants growing near campsites. People noticed that seeds dropped near the fire often sprouted. They returned to these places. They tended them subtly. And in time, they learned to plant intentionally. They shaped the land with gentle hands. Stones placed to guide water flow. Trees thinned, not cleared. Clay dug and shaped, then returned to the earth. Even in early domestication of sheep, of goats, of grain, the approach was one of integration. These creatures were not owned in the modern sense. They were partners in survival, each shaped by their environment and by the human presence beside them. The boundaries between human and nature were not sharply drawn. A home might blend into a hillside. A path might be no more than a line of footprints softened by wind and rain. There were no sharp borders, only zones of influence, areas of familiarity fading gently into the unknown. And it is important to remember, this world was not still. Mountains eroded, rivers flooded, forests burned or grew dense. The people were always adapting, moving uphill when the marsh spread, planting new crops when older ones failed, shifting shelters when storms grew stronger. Their relationship with geography was not static, it was a dance. Imagine now a small group standing on a ridge. The sun is rising behind them, and before them stretches a valley they have never seen. They stand silently, watching, listening. There are no maps in their hands, no claims being made, but already they are assessing where the water runs, where the soil darkens, where the deer might pass. In that silence, a decision will be made. To move, to try, to begin again. This was the essence of the Neolithic relationship with the land. A continuous negotiation, a series of quiet conversations between people and place. They did not take more than they needed. They did not build for grandeur. They built for shelter, for function, for survival. And in doing so, they left subtle marks, rings of post holes in the earth, paths of compacted soil, discarded shells turned chalky with time. The land remembers, and in its memory, we find the shape of their lives. So, as we continue this journey, carry with you the awareness of place, of how deeply environment shapes action. How a single river bend might decide the path of 1,000 lives. How the direction of a mountain's shadow might change when people rise, when they sleep, when they plant. The Neolithic world was not just inhabited, was inhabited with intention. In the next chapter, we will step more fully into those shelters shaped by hand and instinct. We'll cross the thresholds of homes, simple and sturdy, and feel the spaces carved out for rest, for warmth, for privacy, and for presence. The land shaped the people, and the people, in return, learned how to live in rhythm with it. Let that rhythm settle around you now. Let your breath move like wind over long grass. Let your thoughts become still like stones in a stream. The earth is old. It holds many stories. And tonight, we walk quietly among them. Imagine approaching the faint outline of a dwelling at dusk. There are no doors to knock on, no locks, no address, just a low curve of earth and timber, partially embraced by the hillside. A thin column of smoke curls from a small opening near the roof, and the air carries the scent of burning wood and warm stone. Your steps are muffled by the soft, compacted earth beneath your feet. There are no lights, no porch, no sign to tell you you've arrived, but you know you have. You stand at the edge of what someone long ago called home. In the Neolithic world, home was not a fixed concept. It was not a thing built once and left untouched for generations. It was fluid, evolving, often communal. Homes grew and shifted with the seasons, the needs of the family, and the condition of the land. Some were permanent, dug into the earth like gentle hollows. Others were temporary, built to last only as long as the hunting was good or the water nearby ran clear. But every home, no matter how simple, was a deliberate act of claiming space, of drawing a circle of safety in a world where nothing was guaranteed. Let us step inside, carefully. The interior is dim, but not dark. A fire glows softly at the center of the space, its embers pulsing with quiet life. Round it, stones are arranged not just to contain the flames, but to hold heat, to cook with, to dry wet clothes or herbs laid nearby. The air is warm, but not smoky smoke, rises and finds its own way out through the roof or through small gaps in the structure. It moves slowly, like a ghost at rest. The walls curve around unit, made from bricks or mortar, but from the earth itself. Packed clay, woven reeds, stacked stone, animal hides. Each wall tells a story of what was available, of what the builder knew, of what they expected the weather to do. These aren't designs drawn from imagination. They are born of lived knowledge, passed down through observation and practice. What keeps the wind out? What holds warmth in? What bends but does not break under snow? The floor beneath your feet might be hard-packed dirt, smooth by repeated steps, or it might be lined with woven mats, or even covered in furs, soft underfoot. There are no chairs, no shelves lined with items, but there is order, a place for sleeping, a place for working, okay? A place where tools are kept, neatly bundled or hung on cords. In some homes, there are small ledges carved into the wall, itself a resting place for a treasured item, a piece of antler shaped into a comb, or a stone that has meaning only to the one who placed it there. Homes were not large. They were not meant to impress us. They were meant to contain, gather heat, to gather people, to gather memory. A family might sleep shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in fur, in woven blankets, their breaths rising and falling in rhythm with the fire. The children curled near the embers, the elders facing the door, listening for change. Privacy, in our modern sense, was rare, but there was still a sense of space, of place, quiet moments carved into the noise of shared life. In some settlements, like those at Catalayuk, in what is now modern-day Turkey homes, were clustered tightly, their roofs connected like stepping stones. People entered through the top, climbing down ladders into the belly of their homes. There were no streets, no courtyards. The rooftops were the walkways. This changed how neighbors interacted. It changed how light entered a room, how sound moved, how air flowed. It created a world turned inward, protected, nestled into itself. In other places, homes were scattered, each one hugging the edge of a field or pressed against a natural rock formation. These homes often evolved over time, walls rebuilt, roofs replaced, new rooms added with the birth of a child or the return of a wandering relative. A home was not a sealed box, it was a living thing, and like any living thing, it grew, shifted, and sometimes withered. But within every home, there were small signs of care, of thoughtfulness. A smooth pebble placed near the fire for comfort. A carved mark near the entrance, perhaps to ward off spirits or to mark the years that had passed. Bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Not just food, not just medicine, but also scent, memory, and familiarity. The smell of home is something that has never changed. It lingers, it comforts, it anchors. And though the Neolithic home was often dark and earthy, it was not without beauty. People carved designs into walls, etched patterns into bone tools, painted symbols with ochre and ash. These markings were not ornamental in the way we think of decoration. They were expressions of belief, of presence, of belonging. A handprint on the wall was not just a mark, it was a reminder. I was here. I lived. I mattered. Private spaces, too, were subtle. There may have been no doors, but there were boundaries. A certain corner where only women prepared herbs. A small nook where a man kept his tools. A cradle made of basket and fur where an infant slept. These spaces were respected, not by locks or walls, but by shared understanding. A kind of unwritten etiquette born of daily life, of trust, of community. Outside, but still part of the home, there were storage pits dug into the earth, covered with woven lids or flat stones. They held grain, nuts, dried meat. These caches were lifelines in lean seasons, and their preservation required vigilance. Animals had to be kept away. Moisture had to be managed. Sometimes, the entire community shared such storage, marking a collective effort in the face of nature's unpredictability. Nearby, the remains of firewood were carefully stacked. Water was stored in animal skins or clay vessels. Tools were leaned against a post or placed beneath a protective overhang. A home extended beyond its walls, blending into the land around it. It had no fence, but its boundaries were known. Children played in the dust, their laughter carried softly on the breeze. They learned the layout of their home by crawling, watching, mimicking. An infant might reach for the same tool every morning, not because it was needed, but because it was familiar. That tool would be dull one day, worn smooth by small hands before it ever saw use. And when that child grew older, they would carve their own tool, their own memory, into the rhythm of the home. There is something deeply human in the act of building shelter, in choosing a place, gathering materials, and shaping them into protection. It speaks to our need, not only to survive, but to belong. The Neolithic home was not just a reaction to the elements. It was an expression of identity, a family, of a small claim staked gently in a vast and changing world. As we leave this chapter, take one last glance around. Notice the low beam overhead, worn smooth by many hands. Feel the warmth still radiating from the firestone, the scent of yesterday's cooking clinging to the air. Hear the soft breathing of others asleep. Outside, the night deepens, but inside, the home holds steady. In the next chapter, we'll step beyond the home and into the world of food of gathering, hunting, storing, and sharing. For in the Neolithic world, survival was never guaranteed, but always earned. And every home was only as strong as the food that filled it. So let your thoughts settle once more. The fire is low. The walls are strong. You are safe, for now, in a home shaped not by ambition, but by need and by care. Before markets, before currency, before shelves lined with options and aisles bright with packaging, there was the search. The daily, careful, reverent search for sustenance. In the Neolithic world, food was not a convenience. It was a central thread woven through each day, each season, each decision. To eat was not taken for granted. It was earned through skill, through vigilance, through patience. The path to nourishment was as much a part of life as breath itself. Imagine yourself waking with the sun, the fire, now ash and faint embers. Your body stiff from the hard-packed floor, warmed only by furs and proximity. There is no idle rising, no pause for idle reflection. Hunger begins as soon as your eyes open, and with it, the work begins. Children stir quietly, knowing their roles. The older ones will help carry baskets. The younger will watch, wide-eyed, absorbing lessons through silence and mimicry. Everyone participates. Everyone depends on one another. Let us begin with the gatherers. They move silently through the morning light, baskets in hand, feet used to the cold earth. They know where the first berries will appear, which shrubs are ripening, which roots lie just beneath the surface. Their knowledge is inherited, not written. They remember last season's growth patterns, the signs of drought or heavy rains, the changes in leaf color and shape. They do not pluck indiscriminately. They do not harvest all. Take some, leave others. Ensure next season's return. A woman kneels beside a low plant. With practiced fingers, she tests the give of a fruit skin, the tension of its stem. She cuts with a blade of flint knot, sharp in the modern sense, but precise. The fruit drops into her basket, cushioned with leaves. She moves on. Not a sound wasted. Not a movement without purpose. Nearby, another figure digs gently at the base of a tree. She is looking for tubers. The soil here is rich, damp, but not soggy. She feels with her hands, then uses a pointed stick to loosen the earth. With care, she lifts the plant knot, snapping, not breaking. If the root tears, it spoils quickly. If it bruises, it might not last through the week. She sets it in a separate basket and covers the hole with leaves. The land gives, and they thank it in action, not words. Meanwhile, others are fishing. Down by a stream, still and clear in the early hours, men and women crouch low. Their lines are not made of nylon, but twisted plant fibers, their hooks shaped from bone. Their bait, small insects or chunks of meat kept from yesterday's meal. Some fish with nets woven from reeds, set into the water at dawn and pulled slowly by noon. Others use spears, standing knee-deep in chill water, waiting, watching. When the sun shifts just right, a flash beneath the surface signals movement, a sudden strike, success, or not. Fish are cleaned quickly, carefully. Nothing is wasted. Bones are saved for tools. Skins may be dried for binding, spoiled for broth. The rest is smoked, or dried, or eaten that day, depending on the size of the catch and the needs of the group. And beyond the rivers, the hunt begins. It is never loud. There is no shouting, no glory, only breath, held, movements, measured, eyes, sharp. Neolithic hunters understood the behavior of animals not as a passing interest, but as a necessity. The red hoofprints in the mud, broken twigs at the edge of trees, scat, dried by the sun. They knew which animals moved at dusk, which fled at the scent of smoke, which traveled in pairs or packs. A group moves through the underbrush. One leads, crouching low, eyes scanning the clearing ahead. The others follow, their weapons simple but effective stone-tipped spears, at ladles to hurl them farther, bows strung tight with sinew. They do not speak. Communication comes in gestures, in glances. The deer ahead senses them, but hesitates. One moment, then a strike, a cry, brief. The deer falls. The hunt is over. The work has just begun. The animal is approached with respect. It will feed many. Its skin will warm bodies through winter. Its bones will form needles, awls, even flutes. Its sinews will become string. Meat is divided with care. The strongest carry it back. To rest, gather what they can. Nothing is left to spoil. There are no trophies, only gratitude. It's unspoken, but deeply felt. Back at the settlement, the hearts are lit again. The scent of roasting meat, of herbs thrown on coals, hot stones placed in clay pots to boil water red, fills the air, mingling with laughter and quiet conversation. Children learn to pound grain into flour, mixing it with water, forming cakes cooked on flat stones. Others grind nuts, seeds, or prepare berries. Meals are made from many hands. When the food is ready, it is shared, not according to rank, but according to need. Eating is not solitary. It is communal, slow, mindful. Stories may be told, news shared, plans discussed. But there is no rush. The fire keeps the cold at bay. The food warms more than the body. It reinforces bonds, offers comfort, replenishes strength not only in flesh, but in spirit. All days are plentiful. Sometimes the traps are empty. Sometimes the berries spoil early. Sometimes the river floods and the fish vanish. These are the lean days. On such days, stored foods are used. Dried meat, rehydrated, grains boiled into porridge. Roots cooked slowly to soften bitterness. Hunger never disappears, but it is endured. Together. In these times, rituals may be performed. Offerings left at a sacred tree. Songs sung quietly at night. Not to plead, but to remember that the land gives and withholds. That survival is not a certainty, but a partnership. And in this partnership, ingenuity blossoms. The Neolithic people did not merely gather, began to cultivate. Small plots near homes, where wild plants once grew, are now tended. Weeds are pulled. Seeds saved from the best plants are replanted. Over generations, the plants change, grow more edible, more predictable. Farming is not a revolution. It is a slow, patient negotiation with nature, one season at a time. Animals, too, are drawn near. Goats, once wild, linger where people leave scraps. The boldest are tolerated, then pinned, then bred. Slowly, they become different, more docile, more dependent, more useful. Milk, meat, hide, bone. A relationship formed not through force, but through closeness. Food in the Neolithic world was not just fuel, it was identity. The types of plants you grew, the animals you kept, okay? The methods you used to cook or preserve, all these marked who you were, where you came from, and what you had learned from those before you. And so, as the day ends, the fire dims again. Bellies are full. Not always completely, but enough. Children sleep, the scent of cooked grains still on their fingers. Okay. Elders murmur about the weather, the stars, the signs, and the trees. Tomorrow will begin again, okay? And so too will the search, the careful, constant, quiet search for food. Let that rhythm settle around you now. It's the soft crackle of the fire, the distant howl of an animal, the weight of a woven basket resting on your hip. Food is no longer something abstract, is real, immediate, necessary. In the next chapter, we will turn our eyes to structure not of shelters or meals, but of society, of rules unspoken, of leaders not crowned, but followed. For even in these early days, power had begun to take shapes, soft at first, like a shadow, but growing. Let your breath slow. The day's work is done. Sleep comes easily when survival is earned. The fire is still warm from the evening meal. Outside, night has thickened, blanketing the land in a soft hush, broken only by the call of an owl, the distant rustle of wind through tall grass. Inside the shelter, you rest in the dim glow of the embers, wrapped in the comfort of furs and silence. But even here, in this seemingly quiet world, structure exists. Not of stone walls or scrolls of law, but something subtler woven into behavior, into memory, into the very fabric of daily life. The Neolithic world, for all its simplicity, was not without systems. Its power had already begun to take shape, but it was not the kind of power we often imagine. There were no crowns, no gold-threaded robes, no great thrones looming over bowed heads, no armies, no prisons. Not yet. Instead, there were choices, consensus, habits, influence, earned and remembered, rather than enforced. Imagine now a gathering, not formal, not summoned, but natural. The members of a community come together, drawn by the light of the central fire or the urgency of shared need. Tia, there's been a disagreement, perhaps about a hunt, or the borders of forging roots. Perhaps someone has broken a long-respected tapa, taken too much from the shared store, or failed to share meat from a successful kill. There is no judge, no single voice that commands. But there is one who speaks first, an elder, perhaps, someone whose hair is streaked with gray, whose hands are weathered with decades of work. They speak not with volume, but with weight. Their words do not echo, they settle. Others nod, some murmur. Another voice joins in. A younger man, passionate but respectful. His view differs slightly. He gestures, explains, invites others to weigh in. No one interrupts. There's space for silence, space for thought. This is leadership in its early form, based on wisdom, on experience, on the ability to listen and to remember. Decisions are made through discussion, through collective memory, through trust, not written down, but deeply known. These are communities built on familiarity. Everyone knows each other. Everyone has a role, and so fairness becomes not a decree, but an agreement. Fragile, perhaps, but powerful in its own way. Still, within these gentle structures, hierarchies emerge, not rigid, but present. The strongest hunters might receive more deference, especially if they share generously. A woman known for her healing knowledge is respected, protected, sought out. The one who remembers the most about when the river flooded, or when the deer last came, This person becomes a quiet authority. Leadership here is earned and can be lost. There is no ruling class, no formal inheritance of title, but there are lines of influence, families who possess more tools, more stored grain, slightly larger shelters. The children may receive more attention, more opportunities to learn from skilled members of the community. Power begins to nest, not yet oppressive, but visible. And over time, this subtle imbalance can become more pronounced. Among these early people, reputation is everything. A person who hoards food during winter may find themselves quietly excluded. A woman who treats others' wounds, who brings comfort to the dying, may be given better cuts of meat. A man who lies, who takes more than his share, might find his traps mysteriously empty, his offers politely declined. There is no law, but there is memory, okay? And in small communities, memory is sharp. Children, too, learn early, not just how to gather or hunt, but how to behave, when to speak, when to listen, who to approach with a question, who sits closest to the fire during council, who is called first when the weather turns or the river rises. These unspoken cues become the foundation of social order. At times, these structures are formalized. In some regions, archaeological evidence shows signs of more defined roles. Graves with rich goods jewelry, tools, animal bones suggest that some individuals were buried with more ceremony, more care. Perhaps they were leaders, shamans, healers. Perhaps they were simply beloved. We cannot know for sure. But we can see that not all were treated the same in death, just as not all were treated the same in life. The presence of large communal structures, longhouses, shared granaries, gathering space that suggests an increasing complexity. Someone must have directed their building, coordinated efforts, assigned tasks, managed labor, not as a tyrant, but as an organizer. These figures, early coordinators of work and ritual, likely held soft power, not through fear, but through the ability to unite. And where people gather, there are rules. Some are born of necessity. You take food from the communal store, you must replace it. If you wound an animal but let it escape, you must warn others. If you use the last of the firewood, you gather more. These are not laws, they are agreements, respected, not because of punishment, but because breaking them breaks trust. In small communities, trust is survival, but there are deeper rules as well. Ritual taboos, objects that must not be touched, songs sung before hunts, stones placed in certain patterns near burial sites. These acts form a kind of sacred order, okay? Recognition that power is not just human, it belongs also to the land, to the spirits of ancestors, two forces not fully understood. And those who mediate with these forces, the shamans, the seers, the ones who interpret dreams or patterns in ash and bonifon, hold their own unique power, not physical, not political, but spiritual. Their words might sway a decision. Their silence might carry warning. In some communities, they are feared, and others revered, but always acknowledged. What we see then in the Neolithic world is the first quiet unfolding of governance, not imposed, but emerging, a scaffolding of relationships, a weaving of duty, influence, memory, and belief. There are no kings yet, okay? But there are voices that matter more. There are actions that shape community, and there are those who guide, who remind, who reconcile. And just as food defines the body, so does structure define the group. A community without shared norms fractures. A group without remembered roles struggles. But when these early systems hold, when they balance labor and reward, punishment and mercy, tradition and adaptation, they offer stability. And from stability, growth. Let us return to the fire now. The meeting has ended. The disagreement resolved, not with decree, but with nods and silence. A child dozes in a mother's lap. The elders lean back, watching the flames. Tomorrow, the hunt will continue. The fields will be checked, the traps reset, and the rules though unwritten, will shape it all. In the next chapter, we will shift to the unseen threats that move through these early lives: sickness, injury, death. For though the Neolithic world was rich with community and ritual, it was never far from the shadow of vulnerability. We will walk gently through the world of illness, not with fear, but with respect, for even in their most fragile moments, these people endured. And in their endurance, they taught us how to care. Let your thoughts drift now, like smoke into the rafters. The world outside remains dark, but within this circle of quiet power, you are safe, guided, part of something larger than yourself. In the stillness of the Neolithic night, when the fire had burned low and only the soft sighs of sleeping bodies could be heard beneath the thatched shelters, another presence often stirred unseen, quiet, but deeply felt. Not a spirit, not a predator, not a storm, but something more intimate. Something that lay beneath the skin, behind the eyes, within the breath. Sickness. It came softly, without warning, like mist curling along the earth in the early morning. And once it arrived, it rarely left untouched. The people of the Neolithic world did not understand germs or viruses. There were no theories of infection, no microscopes to reveal the hidden universe within a drop of blood or a flake of skin. But they were observant. They knew when a cough deepened, when the heat of a forehead lingered, when the color drained from someone's cheeks and did not return. They may not have known why, but they knew what came next. And they prepared in their own ways. To live in this era was to live closely with nature, with kin, and with uncertainty. A person's body was their livelihood, or tool, their vessel. And when it faltered, the impact rippled outward. A skilled gatherer suddenly weakened. A nursing mother struck by fever. A child, once vibrant, now still and pale. These were not abstract concerns. They were daily, deeply personal experiences that tested the strength not only of the individual, but of the entire group. Injury was the most common doorway through which illness entered. A cut while harvesting reeds, a twisted ankle on the uneven ground, a burn from a hot stone rolled from the fire. At first, these were just discomforts, manageable, familiar. But if the wound festered, if the flesh swelled and the pain deepened, the entire tone shifted. There were no antiseptics, no stitches, just fingers, cloth, herbs, and hope. The community healer, often an older woman, but not always, would be summoned. Her hands moved slowly, precisely, without panic. She might chew a bitter leaf and apply the softened pulp to the wound. She might wash it with cooled, boiled water, infused with ash or bark. The treatment was not merely physical, it was rhythmic, intentional, soothing, a ritual as much as a remedy. The presence of care was itself medicinal. Her knowledge came not from study, but from continuity. She had watched her mother do the same, and her grandmother before her. She had observed how some roots eased swelling, how certain mushrooms, when dried and powdered, dulled pain. She knew when to wrap a wound and when to leave it open, when to offer silence and when to sing. Her tools were not many stones, fibers, a pouch of dried plants, but in her knowledge there was power. But not all ailments were born from injury. Fevers crept in like fog. One day, a person was strong, laughing, gathering berries. The next, they lay sweating and still, their breath shallow, their skin hot to the touch. Others would keep their distance, not from fear or rejection, but from instinct. Yet, the sick were never abandoned. They were tended gently, given sips of water, cooled with damp cloths, soothed by whispered lullabies. Meals were left nearby. Touch was rare, but presence was constant. When a child fell ill, the community grew quiet. Children were precious not because of sentimentality, but because they were the future. Their survival meant continuity, and when their laughter vanished, replaced by wheezing or silence, the air itself seemed to grow heavy. Small trinkets were sometimes placed near them, bones carved with symbols, bits of colored stone, talismans of hope, not magic, but meaning. A way to express care in a world with few tools to fight the unseen. And yet, some recovered. Many did, slowly, haltingly, but surely. Fever would break in the early morning, the patient drenched in sweat. The cough would ease, color would return to cheeks, eyes would brighten. These moments were not marked with celebration, but with relief of communal exhale. The person was welcomed back with quiet joy. There were no medals, no declarations, just a shared meal, a returned smile, the sound of laughter where silence had lingered. Others were not so fortunate. When death came, it too came quietly. There were no sirens, no cold hospital rooms, only the slow dimming of life, the soft prayers or songs of kin, and the hands of the living brushing the hair of the dying. The body was cleaned, wrapped with care, sometimes buried, sometimes laid in caves, sometimes burned with fragrant herbs or covered with stones, not discarded, not forgotten, always honored. Graves from the Neolithic era tell us much about how these people viewed life and death. Some bodies were buried, curled, as if sleeping. Others were placed with tools or tokens, blades, bowls, items that spoke not of wealth, but of identity. Tia, this was who they were. This is what they loved, okay? And in some cases, traces of red ochre were spread over the bodies, as if to return them to the earth in a blaze of color. It's a final gesture of beauty amid the sorrow. Disease did not discriminate. It took the young, the old, the strong, the weak, and in its wake, it left wisdom. The wisdom to store food for hard seasons, to boil water when the river ran low, to burn herbs that cleansed the air, to share rather than hoard. The survivors remembered. And through that memory, they became the keepers of patterns, the ones who would know when to worry and when to wait. And always, there was resilience. Imagine a small shelter nestled in a cold valley. Outside, snow is beginning to fall. Inside, a child sits near the fire, a slight cough echoing from their chest. Their mother feeds them broth made from marrow and dried roots. An elder sings a slow, rhythmic chant not for cure, but for calm. The father returns from gathering wood, his face pinched with worry, but he says nothing. He simply sits, stokes the fire, and listens to the child's breathing. They do not know if the illness will pass, but they do know how to wait, how to hold space, how to endure. And that, in the Neolithic world, was everything. Today, we are surrounded by answers thermometers, syringes, scans, pills. But in those days, there were only questions. And it is perhaps in the answering of those questions with kindness, with presence, with quiet care, that the Neolithic people showed a different kind of strength. A strength not rooted in conquest, but in compassion. Let this image linger in your thoughts as you drift. A world without hospitals, but not without healing. A time without doctors, but not without wisdom. A people without knowledge of bacteria, but with profound understanding of each other. As we draw this chapter to a close, breathe gently, feel the warmth of imagined fire, the hush of a long-ago night, the presence of others, even unseen. In our most fragile states, the thread that holds us has always been the same care, soft, steady, enduring. In the next chapter, we will leave this shelter again and rise with the sun to explore how these people shaped their days. Not with clocks or alarms, but with light and labor, with rest and repetition. For even in hardship, there was rhythm. And within that rhythm, peace. Let yourself rest now. You are safe. You are still. The unseen shadow has passed. And morning waits beyond the quiet. Dawn arrives not with blaring alarms or flashing screens, but with the slow, golden unfolding of light over earth and tree. The horizon does not rush to announce morning, it whispers it. A faint glow emerges above the line of distant hills. curls lazily over fields and forests. The birds stir first, their songs tentative and scattered, like early thoughts drifting through a sleepy mind. And then, without urgency, the Neolithic world begins to wake. There is no clock to set the schedule, no digital alert to call anyone to action. Time here is measured by the angle of the sun, by the warmth of the air, by the hunger in the belly. Life is not segmented into rigid hours, but flows in natural pulses, light and dark, hunger and fullness, work and rest. And in this pulse, the people find rhythm. Imagine a small shelter, its roof low and smoky from the fire that still smolders in its center. Inside, the warmth lingers from the night. A few quiet movements stir in the dimness a woman rising slowly to stoke the coals, a child turning over in sleep. The air smells of ash, fur, and packed earth. Soon, voices will return, soft and murmuring, but not yet. There is a sacred stillness to the early moments of the day. Outside, the world is already shifting. Birds flutter through the underbrush. A distant deer picks its way through the grass, ears twitching. The first rays of sun touch the tops of trees, and the entire landscape exhales. For Neolithic people, this moment is not symbolic, it's functional. Light means visibility. Visibility means safety. And safety means the work of the day can begin. Work in this world is not confined to one place. It is not done at a desk or in a factory. It is everywhere, woven into the land and the people's bodies. There are tools to sharpen, nets to repair, wood to gather at the fields, small and scattered, where early domestic grains bend under morning dew. There are children to carry, goats to check, baskets to weave, and every task matters. But there is no mad rush. The rhythm is steady, intentional. A woman grinds grain on a stone slab, her hands moving in the same circular motion they have known since childhood. The sound is soft and consistent, stone against grain, grain against stone. Beside her, an older man sits mending a leather pouch, his fingers working methodically along the seam. Their eyes do not meet. Their voices are quiet. Their presence together is companionable, reassuring. Children are not idle. From an early age, they mimic, they carry small loads, help fetch water, watch the adults closely, learn the steps of daily survival as one learns a song through repetition and rhythm. Their games, if they play, echo the tasks of their parents, building miniature shelters from sticks, herding imaginary animals, shaping mud into forms that resemble bowls or animals. Play is learning, and learning is constant. The day unfolds in segments, not hours. Morning is for gathering, checking traps, setting out on small hunts. The air is cool and labor is easier. By midday, the sun is high. The work slows. Meals are shared, perhaps a thick porridge, some dried berries, a small piece of smoked fish or meat. The meal is quiet, communal. There is no hurry. It's just the simple pleasure of nourishment. Afterward comes rest. Not indulgent sleep, but quiet. A pause. In the heat of the day, people might sit under the shade of a tree, lean against the side of a shelter, lie on a fur and close their eyes. Not alone, not always silent, but still. The body recovers, the mind softens. This is not laziness. Sit is wisdom. They know their limits. They listen to their breath, their bones. As the light begins to shift again, lengthening shadows over the earth, the pace increases slightly. There is wood to be gathered for the evening fire, water to be drawn before darkness falls, children to soothe, meals to prepare. The community comes together more tightly now, drawn to the glow of hearths and the comfort of shared space. The evening meal is a slow affair. There is little ceremony, but much connection. Food is passed around. Stories are shared, not grand tales, but small observations. The tracks of a wild pig seen in the north woods, a tree that bore fruit early. Okay? A stone found near the river with markings that seem unusual. Okay? These details become memory, shared knowledge. Okay? They shape tomorrow's plans. As darkness settles fully, the tasks fade. Tools are set aside. Fires are tended one last time. And then, slowly, one by one, the people return to their shelters. There are no lamps, no reading, no work that pushes late into the night. There is only rest. The kind of rest earned through steady labor, through exposure to wind and sun, through the quiet satisfaction of a day completed. Sleep comes easily. The body knows it is time. The mind, gently tired, does not resist. In the silence of the Neolithic night returns a soft, enveloping hush, broken only by the crackle of a dying flame, the distant howl of a wolf, the shifting weight of someone turning beneath a blanket. Yet, not all hours of night are for sleep. Sometimes there is wakefulness in the dark, a mother tending to a child, okay? A hunter unable to settle, checking his gear by firelight, okay? An elder watching the stars, remembering, okay? These moments are part of the rhythm, too. The night holds space for solitude, for reflection, for the kind of quiet thinking that only darkness permits. There are no formal divisions between work and rest, no weekends, no vacation days. Instead, the labor flows in a cycle: gather, tend, build, share, repair, then rest, stand. The rest is not merely the absence of activity, it's part of the whole, a balance, a necessity. Some days are harder. The weather turns harsh, okay? Trap comes up empty. A child falls ill. On these days, the rhythm strains, but it does not break. Others step in. Tasks shift. Rest may come late, or not at all, but it is never forgotten. And when the storm passes, when the wound heals, the cycle resumes. Seasons, too, shape this rhythm. In spring, the days lengthen, and the pace quickens. Seeds are sown, fields watched, streams checked for flooding. In summer, the labor is constant, but light, there is food, water, warmth. Autumn brings urgency, gathering, preserving, storing, quiet anxiety as the sun sinks earlier and earlier. In winter is slow, time stretches, work is done indoors, repairs, storytelling, quiet reflection. The pace softens, the people endure, and within all this, rest is sacred. It may not come with ceremony, but it comes with intent. To sleep under a roof you helped repair, to lie beside a fire you gathered wood for, to close your eyes with a full belly and the voices of kin nearby. These are the gentle rewards of a life lived in rhythm. Let that rhythm settle over you now. A slow exhale, a warm blanket, the sound of crickets in a distant field. The Neolithic people may not have had the words for mindfulness, for balance, for wellness, but they lived it, not perfectly, not without hardship, but with honesty, with attention. In the next chapter, we will step even deeper into their inner world, not of work or survival, but of belief, of the unseen, of the ways they made sense of mystery, death, and dream. For even then, they looked upward to the stars, inward to the spirit, and outward to the landscape, seeking meaning. But for now, rest with them, under that same ancient sky. The day has passed. The fire is low. In the rhythm of life, your life moves gently onward. The night in the Neolithic world was not merely a time of rest. It was also a realm of wonder, a realm where the visible world gave way to the invisible. As the fire faded and silence settled, the flicker of stars across a vast, unpolluted sky drew the eye upward. The soft rustling of wind through grass and the calls of unseen animals stirred something deeper, something older, a sense that the world held layers, seen and unseen, known and unknowable. In this darkness, the Neolithic people did not feel alone. I felt surrounded. surrounded by spirits, by forces beyond naming. They lived in a world where boundaries between the living and the dead, the natural and the supernatural, were thin. These were not people without belief. Quite the opposite. Their lives were steeped in it, not in temples or scriptures, but in stones laid with intention, in patterns painted on walls, in bones arranged with meaning. Belief, for them, was not separate from life, it was woven into it. Imagine waking before the first light, not for work, but for ritual. You follow the same path your mother once walked, her mother before her, through the field, across the stream, to a circle of stones half sunken in earth, their tops now moss-covered, their meaning preserved only in the retelling. You carry with you a small pouch, sided, a smooth stone from the river, a few grains of charred grain, a strand of hair, an offering, something personal but not grand. These items will be left tucked between stones, beneath a particular tree, or pressed into the soil. Not for gods as we understand them, but for presence, for the unseen energies that move through life like wind through tall grass. The Neolithic people likely did not worship in the sense we imagine today. They did not build towering cathedrals or carve elaborate idols, but they recognized power in the earth, in the cycles of the moon, in the places where fire burned or water sprang from stone. Their sacred spaces were not always marked, but they were known. A certain hill, a cave with echoes that lingered too long, a grove of trees where animals gathered and left undisturbed. And in these spaces, rituals occurred, not daily, not on strict calendars, but when needed. A child sickened. The hunt failed. The weather turned without warning. Then a song might rise. A fire might be built with herbs to scent the air. A figure respected, known for their connection to dreams or intuition, might speak slowly, describing the message found in a vision, a shadow, a pattern of bird calls. These were the early spiritual leaders, not rulers, not prophets, but interpreters of the unknown. Some of these figures were likely women, others, men. What mattered was perception, sensitivity, the ability to read signs in the everyday, to notice when the bones of a deer fell in an unusual pattern, or when a birth occurred on the same night the moon turned full and red. Their words were not commands. They were reflections, suggestions, and they were heard with reverence. Caves, too, held significance, not merely for shelter, but for memory. In the quiet chambers of the earth, where light barely reached and the air felt ancient, the Neolithic people left marks, handprints, abstract lines, animal forms. Some of these images were painted thousands of years before writing. What they meant remains uncertain, but the act of painting, of pressing hand to wall, was a form of communication, both with the present and with what lay beyond it. Perhaps they believed the spirit of a hunted animal could linger, that it needed to be honored, remembered, thanked. Perhaps they believed that the land itself had moods, desires, and would respond to offerings or to disrespect. These beliefs were not naive, okay? They were rooted in experience, in pattern, in the deep awareness that survival was not entirely within human control. Burial practices offer even more insight. Some were simple bodies, wrapped and buried near the home. Others, more elaborate, placed with tools, beads, small animals. The dead were not discarded. They were arranged, sometimes curled like infants, returned to the earth as they had come from it. In some places, skulls were removed later and kept within the home, perhaps to honor ancestors, perhaps to retain their wisdom. The dead did not disappear. They remained in memory and in space. The use of red ochre in burials is particularly striking. This iron-rich pigment, bright as blood, was often sprinkled over bodies or around grave sites. Why? We do not know. But the color suggests life, renewal. It may have been a symbolic return of the body's essence to the earth. a gesture of respect, a mark of passage. Whatever the meaning, it tells us that death was not treated casually. It was significant, marked, and likely feared and revered in equal measure. Symbols began to appear not as language, but as meaning. Spirals carved into bone, cross-hatched lines etched into stone, circles surrounding dots. These were not decorations. They were codes of belief, perhaps maps of the stars, calendars of seasons, or reminders of rituals to be performed. They represent thought beyond the immediate, memory held in image. Fire, too, was sacred. More than warmth, more than cooking. Fire represented transformation, matter into energy, night into visibility, cold into comfort. Round a hearth, stories were told, some factual, others not, but all carried weight. A myth might explain why the rains had stopped, why a wolf wandered too close, why a child spoke in sleep. These stories were not just entertainment, they were the shaping of a shared world. And then there were dreams. In the Neolithic night, when silence was deepest and the mind untethered by task, people dreamed of ancestors, of animals, vast skies and endless forests. Dreams were messages, sometimes warnings, sometimes gifts. Those who dreamed often or vividly were listened to. A dream of fire might be a sign of sickness to come, a dream of water, a promise of a good season. And so, the lines between waking and sleeping, between real and imagined, blurred gently. The dream world was not a private space. It was shared, recounted, woven into the fabric of belief. No temples remained from these people, no written prayers. Their footsteps across sacred landscapes remain, her carved stones, their careful burials, her pigments still clinging to cave walls after millennia. These are their devotions, her expressions of awe, their quiet conversations with the unknown. And it is important to remember, belief was not separate from daily life. It was not something they turned to only in crisis. It was constant, a rhythm like breath. The belief that the river spirit would not be angered, that the first fruit must be left uneaten, that the full moon brought clarity, that ancestors watched and remembered, that fire must not be allowed to die out overnight. In these practices, there is a comforting sense that the world is not chaos, but pattern, that actions matter, that care and respect shape outcomes. These beliefs gave shape to the uncertainties of the Neolithic world. They offered explanation where knowledge could not. They offered peace where danger lingered. And perhaps, as you rest now beneath the imagined stars of that ancient sky, you feel some of that stillness, some of that reverence. Reminder that even the earliest among us sought meaning beyond what could be held in hand. That we are not the first to wonder, to fear, to hope, to speak into the dark and wait for an answer. In the next chapter, we will return to the surface, to the land and its boundaries. We will explore how communities met, traded, fought, and learned to live near one another. But tonight, let your thoughts drift among the sacred stones, the firelit faces, the quiet dreams of those who came long before. The veil is always thinner in silence. Let it rest around you now. At the edge of a clearing, a thin line of smoke rises into the morning mist. It drifts slowly, carried by the same wind that passes through distant hills, across valleys, and into places unseen. Somewhere beyond that line of sight, another group watches the same sky, tending their own fires. They do not speak your language. They do not share your kin. But they live, breathe, eat, and dream in rhythm not so different from yours. This invisible thread of presence is where the Neolithic story of human interaction begins. We often imagine ancient life as isolated small bands surviving alone, fearful of strangers, but the reality is more nuanced. Human beings have always been drawn to others for connection, for comparison, for exchange, and yes, at times, for conflict. Imagine a morning long before history. Group from your settlement sets out, carrying bundles wrapped in hide. Inside, obsidian blades napped smooth, tightly woven baskets, bits of dyed wool, dried berries, perhaps even salt gathered from a far-off marsh. This is not a hunt. It is not a raid. This is something older than either trade. The trail they follow is ancient, not marked on any map, but remembered in the stories of the elders. You walk until the red stones appear. Then follow the sun until you reach the willow that sings. These paths, worn into memory, connect not just places, but people, tribes, families, cultures. They arrive at the meeting ground, a neutral place, chosen by time and trust. A flat rock, a ring of standing trees, a bend in the river where the fish run fat in spring. The other group is already there, waiting. For a moment, no one moves. This moment of stillness is sacred. It tests the air, reads the body, decides if peace will hold. Then a hand is raised, a gesture passed through generations. An elder steps forward and lays down a gift, not for bartering, but for honoring the meeting. A small thing, a polished bead, a feather, a pinch of powdered ochre. And just like that, the silence breaks, not into speech, but into ritual, into recognition. Trade was more than economic. It was relational, stitched together communities that otherwise would have remained strangers. Through trade came language, words borrowed, phrases mimicked. Through trade came technologies, better blades, new styles of pottery, methods of smoking fish. Through trade came marriage alliances forged in the arms of sons and daughters who crossed rivers, not with weapons, but with open hands. And yet, even in the best of times, tension lingered like a distant howl in the forest. What if one side took more than was offered? What if a tool broke too soon, or a promise went unkept? What if a forger crossed a sacred line? What if a hunter killed from another group's herd? In a world without walls or laws, honor and memory were everything. Reputation traveled faster than feet. And so, when trust was breached, it didn't take 1,000 warriors to spark conflict. A single theft, a single insult, single misunderstanding at dusk could tip the balance. But war, as we know it, today organized, large-scale, systemic, was not the Neolithic way. Instead, conflict came like storms, brief, sharp, personal. A raid under moonlight, a field set ablaze, a family missing after a foraging trip gone too far. These were not battles with banners. There were ruptures in the delicate weave of intergroup trust. The wounds lasted, not only in the body, but in the heart of a community. The old man who limps from an arrow in his thigh. The mother who still lights a second fire each night, just in case the child taken years ago finds his way home. The child who grows up learning not just the skills of survival, but the names of those never to trust. Memory was currency. Memory was defense. And yet, even amid suspicion, people found ways to return. Over time, paths reopened. Gifts were sent ahead. Child born between two groups became a symbol. A shared hunt, a sudden flood, the need for salt in winter. These pulled former foes into tentative peace. Consider the land itself. It was not divided by fences, but it held stories. One hill was safe, another avoided. One grove was watched over by your spirits, another by theirs. These invisible boundary-shaped movement dictated caution, and, at the same time, the land offered temptation. Fertile soil beyond your range, rivers with richer fish. To seek them meant risk, but not seeking them could mean starvation. And so communities learned to adapt, not just to the earth, but to each other. Some created systems of silent exchange, leaving goods at a known site and returning days later to find a different gift in return. Others met at seasonal festivals, times when animosity was paused, when stories were shared, dances mirrored, games played. These were more than distraction. They were soft diplomacy, encoded in ritual, in celebration. Conflict bred not only violence, but also innovation. Defend. Communities learned to fortify not with walls, but with knowledge, teaching their children the signs of outsiders. Crafting lookout points in trees, passing down signals made with whistles or stones. In some cases, groups coalesced, merging not by conquest, but by necessity. A harsh winter, a predator surge, a sickness. Quote, two settlements might choose to unite, their differences blending into a new shared culture. The way one group sings while harvesting, the way another weaves patterns into wool. Soon, no one remembers which belonged to whom, only that they do it together now. Even today, archaeologists find signs of these layered lives, dwellings that combine different architectural styles, tools made with techniques from two regions, burial sites where people of different bone structures lie side by side. But not all encounters led to unity. Some led to erasure. A smaller group disappears from the record. Their pottery style ends. Their flint sources unused. Did they move? Were they absorbed? Or did something darker take place? Silence in the archaeological record is its own form of whisper. Perhaps the most haunting evidence of Neolithic interaction lies in the bone skeletons buried with broken skulls, arrowheads still lodged in ribs. But even these tell only part of the story. More bones are found with no trauma at all, buried with care, with goods from distant lands resting beside them. They were not enemies, they were kin of another kind. As we come to the edge of this chapter, let us pause in the middle of a long-forgotten trail. To your left, a ridge where centuries once sat. To your right, a stream that once served as a boundary, or perhaps a bridge. Ahead, a grove where two groups once met, not knowing if they would trade or fight. Behind you, the long echo of all the choices made. Humanity has never been truly alone. Even in its earliest days, it has always been negotiating its togetherness, carefully, fearfully, hopefully. And perhaps this is the oldest truth of all, that to be human is to constantly move between us and them, and to decide again and again whether that line will be guarded, crossed, or erased. Now, let us turn toward the earth itself. In the final chapter of this segment, we will explore how the land bears the imprint of these quiet negotiations, how resistance and adaptation were written not in books, but in soil, stone, and silence. But for now, remain here for a moment longer in this borderland of possibility where every meeting held the potential to become memory. The earth remembers, even when memory fades. It records quietly, without ink, without words through shifting soil. Subtle depressions in the land, charred flecks beneath centuries of sediment. Long before writing, before cities, before kings, the land was the only witness. And the people who walked at Tower, Neolithic ancestors left footprints far deeper than mere impressions in the dust. They left behind decisions, reactions, innovations, a long, slow conversation with nature in which every stone, every bone, every grain was a word. Imagine yourself standing where no building rises, where no road cuts the field. A valley stretches wide before you, the river a silver thread glinting beneath a pale sun. Once, this place thrummed with human life, quietly, rhythmically, persistently. People lived not to conquer nature, but to remain within it. And to remain, they had to adapt. The Neolithic era was a dance between stability and change, as people began to settle, no longer wandering constantly in search of food, They were faced with a new and pressing challenge: how to endure, how to coax sustenance from soil year after year, how to manage water, guard against the unknown, and maintain balance with the wild world that pressed always at the edge of cleared land. In the highlands of what is now modern-day Iran, Early communities shaped narrow terraces on mountain slopes. With nothing but stone tools and sheer will, they moved earth to create flat ground for barley and wheat. Each wall they built wasn't just a boundary, it was a shield against erosion, a testament to how deeply they were willing to work to remain in one place. In colder regions, such as the windswept plains of what would become Northern Europe, the Neolithic people shaped their homes from turf and clay. These dwellings, low and warm, were not meant to last forever, but they were good enough for a season, perhaps two, and then another would be built, or the family would move slightly, following the patterns of the animals or the water. Adaptation wasn't just a skill, it was a rhythm of life. And not all challenges were environmental. Sometimes the land itself shifted, a river dried up, a once reliable spring turned sour, floods ruined entire harvests. In those moments, the community faced decisions not unlike those we face today: stay and risk hunger, move and face uncertainty. Many settlements disappeared this way, not because of war or disease, but because the earth demanded a new negotiation. Sometimes the answer was movement, but movement in the Neolithic world was rarely chaotic. It was often planned, seasonal, even ceremonial. A group might shift from the lowlands in winter to higher ground in spring, returning to the same caves or shelters year after year. Their knowledge of the land was profound, built not from books, but from generations of keen observation: when the trees would bud, where the animals would calve, how to read the sky for signs of change. Other times, the answer was innovation. Early irrigation systems were carved into dry landscapes, guiding precious meltwater from mountains to fields. The people who built these channels didn't have engineers or blueprints. They had patience, trial and error, memory. Over time, they learned the gentle slope that let water flow without eroding the soil. They crafted tools from bone and antler, not only to farm, but to measure. They developed calendars of a sort not written, but observed through shadows, star patterns, the return of birds. Domesticated animals, too, were part of this adaptation. As hunting grew less reliable and riskier in settled life, people learned to keep herds, sheep, goats, eventually cattle. They built enclosures, learned feeding cycles, adapted their housing to include pens and warm corners for the animals in winter. These were not always perfect systems. Diseases spread quickly through herds, crops failed, but each failure was met with a decision: try again or try differently. And so resistance took form not through battle, but through repetition, through returning again and again to the task of living, of remaining, even when the odds pressed against them. Adaptation was not only about survival, it was about expression. Cultural adaptation shaped tools into symbols. A polished axe wasn't merely functional, it was ceremonial. A pot's curve wasn't just practical, it was beautiful. People shaped their surroundings and, in doing so, shaped themselves. New materials, like obsidian or ochre, traveled long distances in trade networks that stretched far beyond the visible horizon. These materials weren't just useful, they were desired. That desire sparked innovation, collaboration, exchange. But even in adaptation, there were limits. As populations grew and land use intensified, new pressures emerged: overgrazing, soil exhaustion, deforestation. In areas where trees once stood tall, stumps remained. The people who cleared those forests did so with care, with caution, but also with need. And slowly, the environment began to respond. Rivers silted up, wildlife retreated. In some places, salinization made fields infertile. These environmental consequences were not always fully understood, but the Neolithic people responded in kind. They left, they reshaped, they found new places. The record shows settlements rising, disappearing, then reappearing in altered form just a few kilometers away. In the archaeological layers, we see the scars and the repairs, burned layers from intentional field clearing. repeated rebuilding of homes on the same foundation. Shards of pottery in garbage pits that slowly became foundations themselves. Nothing wasted, everything repurposed. This too was adaptation. And adaptation wasn't uniform, it was local. A group in the marshes of the Nile Delta adapted differently than a group on the Scottish coast, where one community used woven reed walls to allow airflow in humid climates. Another carved homes into the hillsides for warmth. The same need shelter led to many solutions, each elegant, each born of necessity. This mosaic of responses is perhaps the greatest legacy of the Neolithic. It reminds us that human beings, even in the absence of centralized power, formal education, or advanced tools, have always been capable of remarkable insight. The land taught, and people listened. Sometimes adaptation took on spiritual form. Spring that never dried became sacred. A grove where animals always returned became a place of offerings. These sacred geographies shaped movement, gathering, story. They were not simply spiritual, they were strategic. By revering the land, people preserved it, wrapping adaptation in ritual. They ensured its survival. And so the Neolithic people walked the land, sometimes resisting, often yielding, always learning. Today, in satellite images and soil samples, we still find the faint impressions of this ancient relationship. Patterns in the earth where homes once stood, pollen traces where fields once grew, stone paths now covered in moss. The footprints remain, gentle but enduring, remind us that survival is not always loud, that progress is not always swift, that resistance can be quiet, that adaptation can be beautiful, and that the earth still remembers. Before the first words were carved into clay, before myths became scripture or law, the Neolithic people shaped their world with something more enduring. Values. It's not values spoken aloud or codified in rules, but values lived, breathed, and passed from hand to hand. In the soil they tilled, in the homes they shaped, in the children they raised. Theirs was a world without writing, yet everything they did wrote a legacy. It began with survival, yes, but swiftly evolved into something deeper. Relationship with the land, the sky, the animals, the dead, and each other. These relationships birthed customs, and from customs grew values, the seeds of what we call culture today. Take the hearth, for instance. That small circle of stones where fire crackled. More than a source of warmth, it was a circle of belonging. Around the hearth, generations gathered. Meals were shared not as transactions, but as affirmations. You are part of us. Food was more than nourishment, it was a ritual of inclusion. To eat alone was rare. Even visitors, even the injured or old, were welcomed into the warmth. Hospitality was sacred. Those who journeyed where the traders, hunters, or displaced kin found refuge in the homes of strangers, because tomorrow the roles might reverse. The land was unpredictable, but kindness could be counted on. This reciprocity wasn't just practical, it was moral. Age brought honor. The elders were not seen as burdens, but as walking libraries. They had endured droughts, navigated floods, brokered peace, witnessed births, buried the dead. Their memory guided the young. Their presence anchored the community. Their blessings, murmured in dawn rituals or at dusk over firelight, were cherished more than any possession. But tradition wasn't always rigid. The Neolithic world adapted, and so too did its values. When lands dried up and people moved, they brought their rituals but blended them with those of others. This gave rise to cultural mosaics, small villages where beads from distant coasts sat beside local pottery, where burial rites evolved, where shared celebrations emerged from once separate songs. Birth, for instance, was not merely the arrival of a child, it was the renewal of the group. Midwives held revered positions. After birth, some communities placed symbolic items like grinding stones or animal figurines beside the baby, to bind it to the land and lineage. Names were chosen, not for beauty, but meaning often linked to the season, the stars, the dreams of the mother. Naming was not random. It carried hope, history, and sometimes warning. A child born during famine might be named ash soil to remember struggle. One born after a great storm might be called rain's end, signifying peace. In this way, the community kept its story alive not through books, but through blood. Coming of age was marked not by numbers, but by deeds. The first solo hunt, the first successful harvest, the first time a young girl sang the harvest song without trembling niche became a threshold. Sometimes these transitions were quiet, sometimes celebrated with feasts or songs, but always they were noticed. To be seen, to be recognized by the community, that was the true passage into adulthood. Marriage, too, was not just between two people, it was between families, even between settlements. Dowries weren't always wealth. They were gestures, a carved bowl, a basket of rare herbs, a promise of peace. The ceremonies may have lacked grandeur, but not meaning. Hands were joined, oaths spoken. Sometimes a fire was lit and kept burning until it died naturally, symbolizing trust. The land itself was a teacher of value. It taught patience when seeds took weeks to sprout. It taught resilience when frost killed young shoots. It taught reverence when a well dried up or a hunt failed. These lessons became embedded in seasonal festivals, dances before the rains, songs of gratitude during harvest, silence during the lean months. The earth was not on dead, was honored. Even conflict had its codes. Fights over territory or food did occur, but were often resolved with ritual, shared feasts, mediators, ceremonial exchanges. Bloodshed, when it happened, left scars, not just on land, but in memory. Entire generations might carry the story of a feud or reconciliation, till eventually new alliances were forged through marriage, migration, or shared survival. Among the most sacred values was memory. The past was never distant. Ancestors lived not just in stories, but in tools, in trees planted beside homes, in bones buried under floors. Children knew the names of those who came before, not because they were kings or warriors, but because they were family. Every tool passed down, every loom or axe or bone carving carried fingerprints of the past. Some communities marked this reverence physically with burial mounds, stone markers, carved symbols. Others built shrines, sometimes nothing more than a circle of pebbles where flowers were left. There were no temples, no priests, but there was a profound sense that the unseen mattered. The wind's direction, the flight of birds, the shape of clouds, these were read as messages. Was this religion? Perhaps, but not as we know it. It was a way of being, a living belief that everything was connected and that actions echoed, even silence had value. There were times in the Neolithic year, especially after the harvest, before the first frost when whole communities fell into quiet, a time to reflect, to listen to the land, to remember those lost, to prepare. This cyclical rhythm of planting, waiting, reaping, remembering created a spiritual calendar. It needed no dates, no clocks. The body knew, the people knew, okay, and they aligned themselves not with profit or expansion, but with balance. Okay. What did they fear most? Not wild animals, not starvation, but forgetting, okay, forgetting the ways, forgetting each other, okay. So they built with care, taught with love, passed on not just what they knew, but who they were. Some of these traditions survive, disguised by time, the way we gather for meals, the way we honor our dead, the way stories are told at bedtime, the desire to return home, to belong, to name our children after our elders. The Neolithic era did not give us skyscrapers, machines, or written law, but it gave us values that outlasted stone. Kindness to strangers, respect for the old, joy in creation. Grief held communally. Love expressed in ritual, not riches. In their simplicity, these people were not primitive, they were profound. And as we chase the future, it is worth turning back now and then. Not to live as they did, but to remember how they saw the world, with wonder, with humility, with the deep knowing that we are part of something vast, something ancient, something shared. That is their true legacy.